Hello and welcome, dear viewers. This video has been delayed by not just a couple of months, more like almost 2 years. That's right, I first started filming with this optic way back in September of 21. And then the world basically went upside down and things got sort of whacked out of alignment. However, here we are, some odd 2 years later, to finish this full review. However, the story doesn't end there. When I was joining all the footage to make the full review here, I realized that since I had recorded all the footage for that, my skills, my mindset, my ability to record, and my OCD has changed significantly. So I went back to the drawing board, scrapped all the footage, and decided to refilm it, which is why it took me a little bit longer than I anticipated. However, as a result of that, I have some pretty good information on this long-term optic. So with that, let's get started. What are we even looking at here? Well, you are checking out an IOR Valdada breaker 2-16x42 in first focal plane featuring the MP8 illuminated reticle. This is a Romanian-made optic, and as a result, it's got some interesting quirks and features that you don't really find on a lot of other optics. You should check out my unboxing if you want to. That was posted, I believe, December of 21. So it might take you a little time to get it, but once you get it, you'll know what I'm on about. The most interesting, though, is this, the rear diopter setting, or your eyepiece adjustment. What this is doing currently is, as we're adjusting it, you can very clearly see that the size that we are able to look through the optic changes dramatically, and no other optic really does it to this noticeable level. Ultimately, what does that mean? Well, depending on your eyesight or your prescription with your glasses, you might have this gigantic view through it or a tiny view through it, but we're going to be going through that more throughout this video. Taking a look at the reticle, we have a very large center dot, which can sometimes be a little bit too big if you're going for really precise shots. Another one of those weird sort of features about this optic is where the mill drops are. They're kind of just like all over the place, and it's a little hard to pick up if you're trying to look at it really quickly. Adjusting the rear diopter again shows that we have the exact same sort of thing. You can make it huge or really small. Illumination on this thing is barely noticeable. You're not going to notice it unless you're in a very dark environment, so don't expect it to be used as a red dot in any sort of regards whatsoever. It's honestly borderline useless. The play in the top part of the turret absolutely make these feel way worse than they are, but despite how they look and how they sound, they still feel a little muted.
IOR Valdada, 2-16. We are lined up perfectly with the reticle to the target. Illumination is barely noticeable, but again, this is a very bright target now that I've adjusted the light on it. If we go to adjust the side focus, you'll see that yes, things do shift around, but once they come into the perfect plane of existence, everything lines up perfectly fine. I do wish that this side focus had a little bit more adjustability. It's a little too coarse. I wish it was a little bit finer. Anyway, on with the show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So far, beautiful. That looks like it's tracking perfectly. Let's reset the windage. Perfect. And let's continue up with the elevation. 10, 10, sorry, 10, 10, 10, 10. 10 mils of total elevation. You can see we have a 0.1 discrepancy and a little bit of play back and forth because now that's 0. So let's return this thing to its original 0. Right there, that's indicated 0. You can see we have a little bit of play in the turrets, so I'm going to go down with it for a mil, come back to 0. We're a little bit high. I'm going to go up 1 mil and then return back to 0, and you can see we have about 1/10 of a mil of erector slop, which is not that uncommon. It's probably a little bit less than 1/10 of a mil, but it's definitely there. Plus 10 mils of elevation. You can clearly see there we're about that 1/10 of a mil off, and it shifts a little bit on the windage, so not perfect. Also, the turret, it's a little tight there. I'm not too sure as to why, but these turrets are a little wonky. They could be definitely a little bit better as far as the erector setup, but other than that, it's not too bad. It's about 1% off on 10 mils on both the windage and the elevation.
There's a lot to unravel with this optic. As you saw, the illumination, like I said, even with a brand new battery, is practically useless. If IOR decided just to completely eliminate it, I don't think it would really cause that much of an issue. One nice thing about this thing, though, is the side focus goes down to a whopping 7 meters. That's closer than just about any other optic I've ever gotten my hands on. It's painfully, painfully close. However, with that really, really close sort of adjustment, what we're also forced to have to deal with is a really, really tight window of overall focus from either 7 meters out to infinity. And the knob on the side is rather small. So what happens is the adjustment now goes from fairly fine to now very coarse. And getting things in focus is a little bit of a back and forth. You really have to be paying attention when you do it. However, when you do it, and you do it well, you could see here at 16x 30 yards, we have a fantastic looking image. Moving up to the top of the telephone pole, you can clearly see, again, we have a beautiful image. But take note of the green tinted power lines in the background and the slightly purple tinted power lines in the foreground. That is absolutely the mark of European glass. They do that for a number of things. One is to pick up contrast, but two, you can pick up whether something's out of focus behind the object that you're in focus or in front of it. So it really does have some benefits. I absolutely still prefer having zero tint to any of my optics, whether it's an MPVO like this, a red dot, reflex, you name it. I prefer having as close of an image fully represented through the optic of what I'm actually supposed to be looking at. It's just what works best for me. I find I'm a little bit faster to get on target, a little bit faster to make hits. It's just easier for my eye to pick up. As I slowly increase the magnification here to focus on our 400-yard brick building, I will tell you that the magnification ring on this is fairly stiff and there's not a lot of traction on it. You do have these sort of like dimples that are mirrored throughout all the controls, and they're okay, but they're just nowhere near as good as a little throw lever or some really aggressive knurling. It's also a little bit more than 180 degrees from minimum to max magnification, so you really got to sit there and spin it for quite some time. As far as the image quality here at 400 yards, it is absolutely fantastic. We have a lot of contrast. We have a lot of sharpness and resolution to the image. You could see that chromatic aberration coming up on top of the brick building behind the trees. That's where the area of most contrast is. And generally, we just have a beautiful looking image. Now, at 16x, yes, this is very nice, but as you'll see soon, once you go slightly off axis, it just falls apart. The Eyebox on this thing is exceptionally tight, despite the fact it's got a 35mm main tube. Pairing that with a 42mm front objective, it doesn't make for the best combination, I feel. I back out the magnification slightly to about 12x, and the image still looks very, very good, and some of that chromatic aberration isn't as apparent now than it was at 16x. Notice that I'm using two hands to change the magnification because it's a lot easier to try to do that. I backed the magnification out to 10x before we go ahead and look at our next object, which is going to be the 800-yard power towers. At 16x here at 800 yards, you're really going to notice the tint as I change the side focus from infinity down to 7 meters. Once I start going back up, you'll see everything just starts to get a light little hue to it. And again, that's just part of the design of the glass. US glass usually doesn't really do that. Japanese glass doesn't really do that. The only reason why lower quality tier glass will have any sort of chromatic aberration or distortion or whatnot is simply because it's just lower quality glass. But at least here with European glass, it's mostly done by design. I mentioned this briefly already, but let's now adjust the camera moving side to side to see just how tight this Eyebox really can be. And at 16x, you best be behind it 100% perfect, because if not, you really have hard aggressive shadows that creep up all the time. Backing out the magnification to about 10x, it does get a little bit better, but again, you really got to be behind this thing perfect. It's the biggest detriment to this thing overall. From about 2 to 8x that you'll see later on, it's not terrible, but once you get into the double-digit magnification range, it's really a little bit too tight. 16x at about 1,000 yards, again we are greeted with a very good looking image. We have enough sharpness and resolution to pick up all those little tiny branches as well as most of the shingles on the roof. Playing with the side focus, just trying to get a little bit more out of it, you can see it gets about as good as it can get. And mainly, again, that's because of just how small the side focus is and how low it goes. IOR could have tried to alleviate the problem by having either a larger knob on there, so this way you have a little finer adjustment, or just having the minimum focus be, 25 or 30 meters as opposed to 7. Anyway, I back up the magnification to about 6 to 8x. I add 10 mils of elevation, and we're going to see what sort of changes are going to be made to the glass as a whole. As of right now, you can already tell the image gets a little bit soft in the upper part of the hemisphere, but once we increase the magnification to full, it mostly goes away. So if you're dialing this thing for about 10 mils at any sort of distance, you don't really have to worry much about any sort of distortion or problems with the image when you're adding elevation. But what about if you're shooting at night, or just like we have it here, late dusk? It's about 7:30 p.m., early part of the summer. We still have some light out there, but the sun's well crested over the horizon. How does this thing fare with a 35mm tube and a 42mm front objective? Well, right off the bat, you could already see it's letting in a fair amount of light considering what we're seeing through the optic and what we're seeing outside of the optic. It looks about the same. But how is this thing going to perform when we increase the magnification to its maximum? You can see there the illumination is on full, and it's just enough to really make a difference here. Unfortunately, can you really tell what you're aiming at? Not really. You can make out some of the larger objects and definitely some of the color differences between like the parapet wall and the brick or maybe the air compressor. But other than that, it's sort of just, it's sort of a lost cause. Moving on to my home away from home, the 50-yard line at my local range, let's get a little bit more into what this optic really is. Well, it's an MPVO, a medium-powered variable optic. What that means, the low number is around 2, and the high number is probably like around 15 or so. This being a 16 is definitely on the upper end of that limit. However, the fact that it's got a 2x as a base really reinforces the fact that this thing is an MPVO, not an HPVO or high-powered variable optic. Those would usually start like around the 4x or so, and usually have a higher magnification of about 20 or so. I really, really love these sort of magnification ranges because they're so painfully utilitarian. A 2x here at 50 yards, as you're going to see, is not going to really increase the magnification so much that you can't quickly get on a small target. And 16x, yes, it's going to be a really tight eye box, but you still have the ability to make really precise hits on really small targets and be able to identify what you're shooting at very efficiently. So they really cover a very broad spectrum of what you might be using your optic for. At 2x, like I said, it is fantastically clear, sharp, and bright. But the one thing I don't like is how thin the lines are for the duplex reticle. You don't really notice anything in the middle until you crest about the 8-ish magnification range like you see it here. It only really comes into play once you get above 10x and, of course, all the way up to 16x like its maximum here. But below those like, 6x or so, it's kind of hard to pick up where the dead center is. If this thing had daytime bright illumination, like a red dot or P4XI, holy cow, would it really be able to open itself up even further and be even that much more practical and usable. At 50 yards, though, ultimately we get a beautiful image. You do see some chromatic aberration. I gotta slow myself down because I outrun my tongue. But you do see some chromatic aberration at the bottom, and it's really not intrusive whatsoever. It's only when you're really out of focus do you really see any of that sort of imperfection creep up. Other than that, though, more than practical looking image here. You can pick up the 22 LR holes everywhere, whether it's on the white, in the black, or on that grid pattern that you see below it. Now, as far as the Eyebox goes, at 2x, it's surprisingly forgiving. It's on par with, honestly, some LPVOs, some second focal plane LPVOs at 2x, not even first focal plane LPVOs. It's really pretty damn good, especially considering this is a 2:16, so it's an 8x magnifier inside. I was thinking it was going to be a little bit worse than this. Increasing the magnification here to 8x, it's still a very good performance compared to LPVOs. And the main reason is, again, 35mm tube, 42mm front objective. It's only an 8x multiplier for an MPVO, so it's really not stretching itself too far. Unfortunately, once you go above 8x and you get into the realm of its maximum here at 16x, things get very tight, and that's just to be expected on any sort of optic. Overall, it's a very usable Eyebox, but again, the reticle is really hard to see in the lower magnification ranges. If it had a thicker duplex, different story. Getting into my final thoughts here at Largebore, what am I left to say other than this thing is a very competent optic. It performs a lot of its tasks very well. The glass is exceptional. It tracks well enough. The reticle I can't really leave much on because that's completely objective. I don't particularly care for it all that much, but you might love it. The turrets and the other controls are all just a little, off. They're a little odd, but this is a Romanian optic, so maybe that's just the way it is. I love MPVOs. I've stated that before. This is definitely one of the larger magnification ranges, being a 2:16. Not many manufacturers really create these. They're usually 2:10s, 2:12s, and a couple oddballs in between, this being one of them. However, there are two main reasons why I would not buy this, or B, keep this. First off, I don't think I really talked about the weight. This thing is 35 ounces. And this thing also comes in at around $2,600 US, if you could really find them. Those are both two very large figures where I don't want there to be very large figures. Who the hell wants to carry around a 35-ounce optic before a mount on any rig except if you're already carrying around like a Scar 17 and it weighs like 20 pounds by the time you're done? That might be good if you want to mitigate recoil. But for me, that's a killer. If this thing was 25 ounces, yeah, we're talking, because it would be under 35 ounces with a mount. So that right off the bat is one of the reasons why I'm probably not going to end up keeping this. And as far as the cost goes, like I said, it's very, very expensive. I actually bartered this off of Patreon provider Scott for 2 loopholes for the price of 1 IOR. And he's very happy with the loopholes, and I got to review this thing. I have no regrets because I was very excited to get my hands on this because, again, it's an MPVO. What there not to love? But it's just not ideal for what I would like. If this is something that you would like, or if this is something you're dead set on because you want to get an IOR, then this is it. And as long as you're willing to accept all of its quirks and features, then congratulations, you're in for a really nice little optic. It's little, but it's not light. It's stout. Stout little pudgy man. But again, as far as the image quality here at 100 yards goes, it's absolutely fantastic. And as we continue to stretch this out here at the Largebore range, it remains fantastic. The colors are all vibrant, crisp, and clear like we've seen throughout this entire 20-minute long video. God, I don't know how I make these so long. Tell me how I can make these a lot shorter, people, because I feel like I just get lost in translation. Anyway, focusing on the steel targets and the berm, again, perfectly fine. Except for that side focus, which is like, I gotta adjust it ever so slightly. It's like, nope. Okay, let me go back and do it. Nope. And it becomes a bit of a chore at times. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into some side-by-side comparison action. On the left, you can clearly see we have the IOR. On the right, is that the PST or is that the Razor? That is actually the PST Gen 2, 3 to 15 by 44. A very, very good budget-minded optic, and they've come down in price considerably. You can find them regularly for around the $600 price point, which is exceptional value for money, in my opinion. Another thing I can compare this to is, well, the one that I compared directly against the PST Gen 2 is the Optica 6. Again, this is in 3 to 18 by 50 form, and not exactly 100% direct comparator to the IOR, but as far as everything else goes, ooh, is it a phenomenal optic. And that MRAD1 reticle that you see there before you, I really liked it when I reviewed it, but now that I've been using it a lot more frequently on my Ruger American Ranch, it's one of my favorite reticles of all time because at 3x, it works incredibly well. We might as well end with another Vortex product. This time, this is the Gen 2 Razor HD 3 to 18 by 50. I threw this in just for laughs, but ultimately, it's still less expensive to find new than the IOR, but it's also 10 ounces heavier, so it's just in there for a laugh. Ultimately, though, these are just 3 comparisons giving you an idea of what you can get for a 1x higher on the minimum magnification and about the same top end, all for typically less money, and all offer extremely high levels of performance. 10x. Giving you an idea one last time of how well this optic does look, though, at 10x here at about 180 yards, it's excellent. So this is a very good optic. It's just got some really interesting feature sets about it that you have to be able to determine if they're going to be right for you or not. And that's it, folks. I've talked more than enough. I've shown you more than enough information about this thing. It's got some very interesting quirks, but if you're okay with the fact that when you adjust the eyepiece in the back, the amount of image that you see through it changes dramatically, that the illumination's that the reticle is that it's really heavy, really expensive. I cannot attest to IOR's warranty. I've heard good things. They claim it's 30 years, and these optics came out, I believe, in 2019, so you got plenty of time if you want to get one of these to, destroy it, but I don't really know anything from personal experience, so I can't sit here and lie to you about that. But anywho, Scott, thank you so much for letting me barter this with you so I can get my hands on it to review it. It's been an interesting experience. I've had it for a little bit over a year, and I like it, but not enough to keep it. That's basically it. I'm going to sell this, hopefully, make some money back on it, and put it into something that'll hopefully benefit the channel and myself more in the future. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching, and as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to help support the channel but don't want to join my Patreon, I completely understand. But you can help by using the affiliate links in the description below. Thanks again for watching.